Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending where in the world you are. My name is Stuart Easton. I'm one of the founders of Transparent Choice. And today we're going to be talking about project prioritization criteria. We run quite a few of the webinars around topics to do with PMO effectiveness and project management. And in particular, we focus on project prioritization. That's a lot of what we do at Transparent Choice. And one of the most common questions we get in that context is, what criteria should I use? It's a really simple question, a deceptively simple question. The answer is not quite so simple. So to help us answer that question, we have a real expert with us today. Roberto Camanho teaches decision-making at Brazil's equivalent to the Harvard Business School. He's an award-winning researcher at the University of Sao Paulo, doing research into project prioritization and decision-making. Most importantly, he has over 100 large-scale prioritization projects under his belt with organizations like Whirlpool, McDonald's, the world's largest paper and pulp company, Suzano, airplane manufacturer, Embraer, various government agencies. The list just seems endless, which Roberto will forgive me for saying, is another way of saying that he's made lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and he's learned from those mistakes, and he's going to share that hard-earned wisdom with us today.
Yes, Stuart, good morning. Good morning for everybody with us today. It will be a pleasure to share these moments of thoughts and questions in the end and answers with you.
Excellent. So before we get to the answer of what prioritization criteria should I use, I want to talk a little bit to get things started by asking you why we even do projects.
Yeah, Stuart, observing the 100 cases you told, normally the companies do a list of projects trying to achieve some goals defined by their strategies. It means the companies has an expectation that the projects make the strategy happen. It means to make the actions in the direction of the strategy. But I saw that a list of projects do not solve this problem of to implement the strategy. We need to evaluate which project is better important than other. And that's the question, is how we do the things right to achieve our goals with the correct projects. And it's motive that the criteria are so important. It means the first thing that is important to understand is when you have a list of projects and you have the strategy, for sure we want to put some questions for that list and said, why are you selected this project and another project? And the other thing is how I guarantee that I won't expend money in the wrong project. It means two things that's important to do with the criteria is evaluate which one give better result for the business, and also to eliminate that ones that is a waste. Sometimes you bring this for a package and you evaluate sometimes that some of them, after you evaluate against the criteria, you understand that that project don't give me the result that I'm looking for. Another thing that's very important for the criteria is to align the people, but we're gonna talk this soon. Other questions important is who define the criteria? Well, If we are defining strategies, normally who need to define the criteria is the top management of the companies, is the people that have the long vision of the company and understand the risks, the opportunities, the costs to be reduced and the target to be achieved or the goals to be achieved. It means it's very important that the top management understand, because normally, unfortunately, they did understand that who define the criteria are them, is to select the future, to define the future of the company.
So this raises an interesting question, Roberto. I mean, over those 100 prioritization cycles that you've worked with people, have you? I mean, how often are the executives well aligned? Do they agree on what the criteria should be and what the strategy is?
No, Stuart. One thing that's interesting, what when I saw when we start each project is each director, each manager, top manager, come to work in the same address, but in different company. It means it's interesting. They have different understanding of the business, therefore different criteria, or even with the same name, criteria has different meanings. It means this is in one phase very important to be aligned, is to define the criteria clearly and explain one to each other what they are talking about. Because sometimes, for example, if I am selecting machines, if I talk about maintenance as a criteria, for me, maintenance is the cost of spare parts. And for you, the maintenance is the cost of energy. It means we are talking about maintenance, but we are not talking about the same thing. Therefore, it's very important to define and to use the criteria as a language for aligning the conversation between the people, even from the rest of the company, not only the top managers, but is a way to transmit the ideas from the top to the bottom of the company. To define criteria, we have 3 steps clearly. The first one is define the criteria. It means what we are looking for. What are your needs? What are our objectives? What are our opportunities? This will help us to define the criteria. But after that we define the criteria, it's important to understand that the criteria do not have the same weight. We need to define the importance of the criteria for that moment of the company. It is the motive that AHP is a methodology multi-criteria, and it's important to say that is the methodology that is more used in the world for multi-criteria. A lot of softwares and concepts and books use an AHP because it will help you to give the weight of the criteria, and giving the weight with the criteria used in AHP that we explain a little bit late. So it's you align in the understanding.
Okay, so just to kind of play that back a bit, the defining the criteria on its own isn't enough. You need to be really clear about what the weight is for those criteria, and then you use them to score projects, and that weighting piece is kind of the really critical piece, because that's the one that ties back to this slide, where you're trying to get all of the executives onto the same page. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and this is where this AHP methodology comes in. I know we're going to talk more about that later on, but this may be a new term for some people on the call. So we're going to come back to this later on and explore and see how that can add value. But basically, it's about getting the executive team onto the same page so that you can then have criteria to use actively to score the projects. But here's a question for you though, Roberto, and
Yeah.
I know you have the answer because it's on the next slide. I've seen the slides. What things are not criteria? I think this was a really important question that you put in here. So do you want to talk us through that for a minute?
For sure. Yes. Normally, the people believes that criteria is everything that you measure. But it's not everything that you measure that is a criteria when you select your portfolio. For example, cost is a constraint. I saw some people put urgency as a criteria. Urgency, time, cost, skills, resources, they are constraints, they are not criteria. For example, make the thing simple. Let me think if we want to select a car. If you put cost as one criteria, you selected the car for cost. And you are not looking for cost, you are looking for benefits and use better your money. It means you are looking for a relation between benefit and cost. And when we use properly the methodology, we understand that cost, time, skills, and the constraints are not criteria. We'll divide the benefit that we evaluate with AHP for each project for their constraints. And you're gonna understand the benefits that you get with each project. It means it's very important don't make this confusion. That normally is normal, but as the people do not study decision making, they believe that number show everything for you, but number is not important for everything. You need to understand what you are for what you are using it.
So putting it another way, there are things that you can use to define how valuable or attractive a project is, and those are your criteria, what the benefits are you're going to get. And then there are other things which are constraints, so it's cost, it's time, it's skills, it's resources, it might be factory space or something, right? And then there are also gating factors. We talked about this the other day. So you know, a project is it a compliance project or not? That's not a criterion. That's not telling you anything about how attractive this project is. That's just a flag that says you've got to do this project. So you don't even have to prioritize that project. That one could go straight to the end and say, yeah, we're going to do it.
Yes.
Yes. So the criteria are about kind of the benefit or the value of the project, and these other things are constraints, and people shouldn't use them as criteria. They are constraints, right? You can't exceed your budget, and you can't deploy more people than you've got, but they're not criteria to help you decide which projects are the best ones.
Now, no, because the concept is other. Okay. The concept is the criteria help you to understand what you want to achieve.
Yeah. So should those criteria be the same for all companies?
No. We need to take care, because some people like to use articles and copy and paste the criteria. Is not correct, because the criteria need to represent what you are looking for with that project. It means you are looking for to achieve your strategy. the criteria need to translate your strategy and the description of your strategy. That's important to put one thing. It is each decision depends on the context that you are. It means I cannot use the criteria of another company that is another context. I need to understand my context.
Yeah.
Or as a tip, what we can do is take a look in the other modules to have one idea or some orientations, but is not a thing to do copy and paste directly. You need to feel that you are the owner of your criteria.
So Roberto, I just want to break in here and just pull out again a little bit of your background. So it's important here. It's often tempting when you're thinking about things like this, criteria and the whole project prioritization process in general, just to go and find some random spreadsheet on the website by someone who's proclaiming themselves to be an expert and say, hey, we'll just use this. Please don't do that. Roberto is an award-winning researcher in this field, in decision science. And so when he says this stuff, he's not just saying it because he's helped 5 customers and found it useful. He's saying it because he's helped an awful lot of customers and he's read all the literature and all the research. And so everything today that we talk about is research-based. It's not just some guy giving you his opinion. And I want you to, if you're tempted to go and just grab a spreadsheet or a generic list of criteria off the web, don't do it. That's kind of my message from this. So let's move on and start talking about criteria and how you should be organizing them.
Yeah, one thing that's important is the criteria is the HP is an analytic hierarchical process. It means you structure the criteria with a hierarchy. And we have here, for example, the goal is the first level. We need always to define what we want to achieve with that portfolio. Or for example, achieve the strategic alignment, strategic goals for 2020 to 2020. Okay? Because we need to understand that more than evaluate the projects, one thing very important, the criteria is a form, a way to transmit for the rest of the company our thoughts. It means it will be used as a conversation tool. We can use a lot to share the ideas with the rest of the company. That's very important. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that I would like to tell you, Stuart, is in the past, I didn't understand this value. And by the way, normally the literature do not present this value. I discovered this value with a research that we did in the University of São Paulo, in 10 cases that I did. And in the 10 cases, the people say it's the most important for us in this methodology was align the people, understand the best projects, and create a way to discuss the problems and everybody knows what we are talking about. One case that was interesting in one of these companies is the director of IT of a big company, one of the biggest in the world in the area where they works. The IT director said to me, it was, Roberto, is the first time that I can talk with the financial guy, with the CFO, and he understands what I'm talking about. It was one case very interesting because we understand that more than criteria is a form to start to talk clearly one with each other.
And in that context, actually coming back to this piece, it's useful then to have those criteria organized in this structure, in this hierarchy that you can see here. Because people understand then if they're talking about, I don't know, customer churn here, they understand that that's part of a bigger goal of improving revenue, for example.
Yes.
So it gives people the same language and the same framework to not just make project prioritization decisions. This was a key insight we got from one of our customers, actually, that it's not just about the project prioritization decision. The people in the organization are making decisions all the time. And so having this clear structure of hierarchical goals, hierarchical criteria, these criteria represent your strategic goals. So it tells people in the organization how they should be making decisions. But it's not a good idea to have too many goals, right?
No. One thing that's important to understand is we need to use maximum 9 criteria in each level, maximum. The better is 5, because you can remember the 5 criteria in the same time. But if you have 20, as I saw before, you cannot understand what you are doing when you evaluate one criteria, because it's a mess of number, and these do not transmit that you are in the correct way. It is, to be clear, is not the number of the criteria that will translate your accuracy with the decision. This relation do not exist, because one thing that's important to understand is when you arrive in the moment to create criteria is because you are looking for to discriminate the projects. It means you have a list of projects. Every project is interesting for you. When you arrive in that moment, you don't have a big list of criteria because you already did this before. You have a short list that you want to discriminate. And if you have around 9 criteria in each level, it's good enough for you to evaluate your portfolio. One thing that's important here in this picture, you can see, for example, when I say 9 is the criteria 1 can have in the second level until 9 criteria, and the criteria 2 until 9 criteria, okay? Each criteria in the next level, 9 sub-criteria. That's the idea.
And again, I think one of the key things is, 5 is much better. So a big part of this is about focusing attention, and the more focused you can be, the better. But you've also got on this slide independent, Roberto. What do you mean by that?
It is when you have one criteria, you need to clearly understand that the results of one do not depend on results of in the other. For example, let's think in a plan for a government. If you put one criteria, education for the citizen, the second criteria, security for decision, this you have a dependence, because if you have education, you have better security. It means if you put criteria that one depend in the other, it will be impossible for you to have a good decision which one is more important. When I say independent, is criteria that one do not depend in the other, okay?
Right, okay, perfect. So when you're creating a list of criteria, we just need to be careful that they're not dependent. This is another area people should be a little bit cautious around. Do you want to talk about balancing the hierarchy?
Sure. It is in this picture that you put is great. We can see that the criteria in green has 5 sub-criteria, and the criteria in in blue has 2 sub-criteria. It means when you have this and you're gonna split 100% of your model in these criteria, they are not balancing. It means in the criteria in green, you have a lot of sub-criteria, divide a lot the weights, and with the criteria in blue, no, you share only in 2 sub-criteria. It means you do not have a symmetry in the tree of criteria. It's very important to create a balance in, as you show. Yes, it's great, this picture, Stuart, show clearly that in this case it's better that you create another criteria in the second level and balancing better the division of the weights with the criteria and the understanding also with the criteria. One thing that's important, excuse me, Stuart, to explain, is 2 things. One, when you start to create the criteria, you start to understanding better your problem. That is a gain.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, it's a good gain.
Now, so I'm lucky enough to know Roberto both as a professional, but also as a friend. You know, we've become good friends over the last couple of years as we've got to know each other. So I know that Roberto could spend at least an hour on this slide alone. So what I'm going to do is suggest we move on. And talk about what good criteria, you know, how you can tell if you've got good criteria or not. And you've already talked about some of this. Yeah,
some practical tips in thousands of criteria is, first of all, the description of the criteria should be clear. And if you have more than 3 lines describing a criteria, you are in the wrong way. The criteria is not need to be so long. Short description is better. The criteria need to be good enough to discriminate 2 projects. It means need to have some description clear that you can read for one project looking for this criteria and another one, and you can discriminate the contribution of the criteria, excuse me, for the contribution of the project for that criteria.
So if you're coming back to your example of buying a car, the number of wheels would be a terrible criterion because they all have 4 wheels.
Yes, it's a good example. It's a good example. And by the way, I saw more than one time the criteria that all the projects have the same contribution. It means you can leave that criteria, you don't use the criteria.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And yes, the statement of why it matters is very important. I normally say, put the right question. Is when you look for the project, is what you are looking for with the projects. What do you want to achieve? Or what do you want to avoid is a good question too. Okay. And the criteria, it's important to understand it's how to measure the project against the criteria. It means normally we use a rating scale from 100%. It means the impact of the project for the criteria is 100%. And the second scale is 75, 50, 25, and 0%. One thing that's important to say, the rating scale with 0, it's important to put because you can have projects that do not achieve for one criteria.
That's great.
The understand of.
So I'm going to say that again because this is something I learned from you a few years ago, Roberto. Is that people talk about 1 to 5 scales, and generally speaking, actually there need to be 0 to 5 scales, or 0 to 4, or 0 to 20. but the zero matters because you often have projects that have no impact at all on a particular criterion.
Yes.
You need to be able to capture that. So that's a really good tip. So you need a scale to, once you've got your criteria and you've weighted your criteria, you need a way of measuring how projects contribute to that criteria or what impact they have on it. And that's where the scale comes in. So how do we, so we know what a good criterion looks like now, right? It's got to be useful for discriminating, it's got to have a clear description, it's got a statement of why it matters, and there's got to be a clear scale for how we're going to measure project impact against this criterion. So why don't we talk a little bit about how to actually come up with that list of criteria, which is actually what I think people probably assumed was the most important part, but actually isn't. But so how should people actually identify their unique set of criteria?
Yeah, the first thing that normally happen is using the balance scorecard. I worked a lot with a company from the group of Kaplan Norton in Brazil, and we use a lot balance scorecard as a reference to create criteria. In this case, it's very important a tip. The part of balance scorecard that we're gonna use for the criteria is the dimension of process and knowledge, not market and financial. Market and financial is a consequence of process and knowledge. It means you need to take care about the use of balance scorecard to capture some criteria. Okay.
Okay. So if you've got balance scorecard, dig it out and have a good look. And again, we don't have time today to go into all the detail, Roberto, but this is something people could follow up with you afterwards about.
For sure, for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah, the project review. One tip is very good is take a list of the most important projects that you have, and list pros and cons and goals with the projects. Put everything in the same PPT or in a wall with sticks, post-its, okay? And you're gonna see one criteria that's good for one project is bad for, one pro in the one project, perhaps a cons in the other project, but that's the important criteria. For example, this project is good for the image of the company. Oh, this project is bad for the image of the company. And we're gonna see that image of the company is one of the criteria. It means you'd like to look for the contribution of the project for the image of the company, okay? And the goals are the same. When you see the project and see what goal will you achieve. And every time it's important to cross this with your strategic map for sure. Other thing that's important is stakeholders interview. I remember one case where a stakeholder outside of the company is very important group that's outside of the company. Excuse me, I was thoughting what I can say about this case. Is in this case is outside group. It is a company that use a lot of natural resource, and it was important to interview the community where the company was. And in this case, it appears good criteria that the company didn't thought to put as a criteria. It means list the stakeholder and interview the stakeholder will help you to increase the quality of your criteria.
So these guys can be internal, it could be the executives, or they can be external, it could be, you know,
Sure.
customers or
Sure.
whatever.
Customer or the community that you are.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, so one quick thing, most people think of the internal audience, the executive team, as being the main stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the way I tend to think about this is that I tend to think of this from the top down, right? So someone's put a lot of work into this thing, into the balanced scorecard. So let's use it if it exists, if you have one. This thing here is something that the PMO leadership can do, and they don't need to talk to anybody else. And what this does is this gives you a list. This can give you a long list of things that you think might be criteria, which means that when you talk to these guys, particularly if you're talking to the executive team here, you can be looking for these things, and you can use your time with the executives to go fishing for this list. You might even, towards the end of the meeting, you want to do open questions first, but towards the end of a stakeholder interview, you might even show them this list and say, is there anything here that you've missed? So you can use, sort of, if you go through it from top to bottom, you'll probably get a better, more consistent, clearer result than perhaps doing it other ways. So once we've got our list, and you mentioned this earlier, Roberto, they're not all equally important.
Yes, one thing that's important is when you have the group of criteria, normally the people divide 100% of weights and do not look for the importance between the criteria, or start to put the number 1, 2, 3, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in as a sticks in the criteria, and forget the most important. The criteria has weight because they have a reference with each other. It means if you put a stick with dividing 100%, you feel lost in a moment because you say, well, this is 30%, this is 10%, but this is 3 times more important than this one. These questions are crazy. You never get a good response because we don't think by this way.
Right.
The magic, the real magic of AHP in these years that I discover is you can create, sharing the ideas, you can create with the group the weights that make sense for everybody. Okay, and I had a case in CEMIG. CEMIG is one of the biggest energy companies in Brazil, perhaps one of the biggest in the world. I was using a balance scorecard with the president and vice presidents. And when we finished to give the weights in the criteria, they clap hands. I said, why you clap hands? They said, because in 5 years is this first time that we are happy with our thoughts and with our discussion.
So that AHP process you're talking about, the heart of this is this thing where we're comparing different criteria and saying relatively which one's more important than the other. That's what you just described.
Yes, yes. It's the case of the pigs that you put banks that you put before that picture, where you compare one each other to understand each one is better. It means if you have 3 pig banks, you want to break in one, the one that you have more money and you don't have a balance, you compare 2 with each other until discover the weight test.
Uh-huh.
This is the same case. You
Yes.
compare the criteria one with each other. And that's very important because in this case, the software will help a lot because as we can see in this picture that you put, Stuart, we use, we have first, you need to understand the question is, what's more important in the contest? Select the high impact portfolio. It's the question that you need to put, the statement or the phrase that you need to think is, what is the importance between these 2 criteria? And in the second picture, the second square that you have here, we see that each person vote in one criteria. For example, the first person vote in the criteria rose, this one. In the other, the criteria blue. Therefore, they have different thoughts about the criteria. In this case, it's very important to share the ideas. And normally we ask for that one that's different than the other. Why did you, or not why did you vote? Explain for us your thoughts. Because you don't want that he explain why he voted. We wanted that he explained what he thought about that criteria, the thoughts that they have about the criteria.
So the important thing of that process is that you're building understanding and a strong buy-in to the weighting, and it's that buy-in that actually helps you get clear decisions from the executive team, and that's why you got the round of applause from the energy company. And so that's
one second, Stuart.
Yeah, sure.
It's important. Come back on in the slide. You're gonna finish. This is very important because, for me, is the most important moment in the portfolio management, because it's the moment that the people are committed to put to select and work with the project. And everybody understand why one project is better than other, because we have a lot of hidden agenda in these meetings. And in the hiding agenda, the people are very nervous to put his project in place. But when you have a rational construction, as we have here, it will be easier to implement after the portfolio. That's very important.
Yeah, and I'd agree very strongly with something you said a minute ago, that this moment here, right, it's not the project selection meeting that's the most important piece of the process. It's this piece that's the most important piece of the process.
Yeah.
Because this is where the executives actually agree on what they're trying to achieve and what's most important. And that is what lets you pick a good portfolio. So the criteria themselves are one part of the puzzle, but the weighting of the criteria is probably the most important step in the whole process. And it is a process. So we've got a slide on that, I think, next. So that's the bit we just talked about. And then the next piece is that so your executive team does this piece at the top, then your subject matter experts can evaluate the projects and score them against those criteria. And that leads to some reports and analysis, and which in turn let you make those quick decisions. So I talk through this slide simply because this is what our software does. So that's it for the sales pitch. This is what we do. We help people do this properly, do this well. So Roberto, I guess we're nearing the end here, and you had some golden rules that you wanted to share with folks.
Yes, the golden rules normally are not in the books. All of them are in separate books, but we aggregate this for the people. First of all, do not believe that a lot of criteria will make you do better decision. My tip is maximum 9 for top level criteria. And this is based on this magic number 7. If somebody wanted to read about, as Stuart said, I research a lot about this. In the magic number 7, give the idea why is 9, and 5 is better because everybody remember 5 criteria in the same level. Include the right people and make sure they are heard. It means when you do not involve the right people, they are a judge. They become a judge in the future. It's very important to select the right people and the people that will give the direction of the company, that really knows the strategy. Use HP as to weight the criteria. Why? Because you can make a construction of the understanding and the alignment of the people. This is very important. And other thing that's important too is different portfolio need different criteria. You have some portfolio that's looking for the future, for example. The other is another portfolio that is make the business better, reduce the cost to run the business, grow the business, and innovation portfolio transform the business. It means each portfolio has or will give a different benefit for the business, and it's important that you separate this and do not put everything in the same box.
And this can be particularly difficult when the resources for delivering some of these projects in these different buckets are coming from the same resource pool. And again, just waving our flag for a moment, that's one of the things that we can help you with, is keeping track of your resources across your portfolio. So anything else, Roberto, on this in terms of the golden rules? So, you know, we've talked about criteria. We had some practical tips for figuring out what the best criteria would be. We've talked about how to weight those criteria and how that's the critical step. And the research, the academic research says AHP is the right place, is the right way to do that. And then, and this last one I think is really important, is that you may view your portfolio as one portfolio from a delivery point of view, but the intent, in intent, you may have different portfolios, running the business, growing the business, and so on. And we see that all the time, where you have, for example, IT is the classic example, where IT supports the whole business, but the needs of the sales grow the business team is going to be very different to the needs of the R&D team. And so it may make sense to have those as separate portfolios with different criteria. So every business is different. As Roberto said, there are no templates that you can just pick off the shelf and use. I wish there were, because this would be a much easier conversation to have with people. But it's absolutely worth doing, because if you get this right, you can identify the projects that are going to have the most impact and deliver them more reliably with much less risk. And at the end of the day, that translates into your organization's performance, improved performance. So, Roberto, I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. I suspect people have had one or two eye-opening moments. I know that you and I regularly have eye-opening moments where I learn something new again. So again, it's very generous of you to share that hard-won knowledge with us. If you want more information, Roberto has offered to take questions and to where he can, but we're running a little bit short of time. So what I'm going to do is just tell people where you can get a little bit more information, and then anyone that needs to drop off can drop off, and anyone that wants to stick around for the Q&A can stick around. So if you want more information, a really good place to go is this project prioritization guide on the Transparent Choice website. If you search in Google, search for project prioritization, we should come up, if not in the top slot like this one, it should be in the top few, and you're looking for the ultimate guide here. There's loads of information about project prioritization and criteria and how to collaborate with your stakeholders. There's another good resource, the criteria ebook on our website. We will circulate these slides and they'll have links to both of these resources for you. This criteria ebook has a list of about 80 criteria, not because they are the right criteria, but just to get you thinking. But it also includes tips on how to brainstorm the criteria and so on and so forth. A lot of which we've heard in this webinar. So that might be a useful reference for you afterwards. And if you have follow-up questions or you want to pick Roberto's brain any further, please drop me an email and I will put you in contact with Roberto. My contact details are here at the bottom. So thank you again, Roberto. I'm just going to pause the screen sharing and go across to the Q&A and see if we have questions for people.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stuart.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
So Roberto, the first question is probably a very simple one, which is, what does AHP mean?
HP means Analytic Hierarchic Process, is a methodology created by Thomas Saati, a mathematician, that in the 70s created this methodology for the Sudan, the country, for the transportation analysis of the infrastructure of Sudan. And after the methodology started to grow, and it's used in different cases, not only in portfolio management, but in strategic decisions, in vendor selection, in selecting people to work, all decisions that you need to have multi-criteria is used AHP.
Excellent. Thank you. So another question that we've got is risk a criterion?
No, no, it's one thing that's important. You can do risk as a criterion, but it's very important that you understand the meaning of risk, because normally Daniel Kahneman has a good definition. He's explained that we are more preoccupied with we have a loss aversion. We not are against risk. It means you need to understand why you are talking about risk, because risk, you have risk positive and risk negative. And when you think about risk, is easy to make a mess. My tip is, when you are talking about risk, try to think about complexity of the projects. For example, in IT exists a lot of preoccupation with risk, but in reality is a preoccupation with the loss aversion. And you can say that's risk, but take care about what you are talking about, okay? And I did models with risk and subtypes of risk as sub-criteria, okay? For example, risk of schedule, risk of technology, risk of methodology, risk of environment. Okay, it can be a sub-criteria of risk.
Great, thank you. So let's just do one last question, because we've gone way over our budgeted time. So one last question, which is, and I assume this is coming from somebody who runs an IT portfolio. Should the business or the IT team define the criteria?
Yes, let me say, I have one case for this person. We can send the article that get award in a Congress about IT portfolio. I can share this. Is one part of the model can be the people from IT, but the The other part of the model can be the people from the company. It means from the business that run the business. You can have one group of criteria talking about the IT aspects, and the other group of criteria talking about the strategy or the operational aspects of the company. It means you can share you can make a model with criteria from different departments, and you share the understanding of each one. Okay?
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you for everybody else for joining us. Roberto, I just want to say thank you again. As ever, your generosity, both as a professional and a human being, never ceases to amaze me. And I've enjoyed this today. We could have gone for several hours, I think, on this topic.
For sure.
So I consider it a minor triumph that we've kept it under an hour. But I apologize to everybody else that that was a little longer than we'd anticipated. But hopefully it was worth it. Most of you are still with us. So thank you all for your time as well. And do get in touch if you have any follow-up questions. There are one or two coming in via the web app as we speak. Thank you all.